Hi, my name is Rich Frankel. Around the time of COVID, I decided I wanted to get a big picture of world economics. For 4 years, I researched various topics and wrote 360 pages about them. You can find that at oneworldeconomics.com. I am also presenting my key findings in a series of short YouTube videos. This slide deck looks at the distribution of income and wealth in the United States. We're going to review a couple of slides from the last talk on world economic income and wealth distribution. This one shows that income inequality has always been high. The red line is the ratio of national income going to the top 10% versus the bottom 50%. We can see that after World War II, income inequality fell worldwide, but has picked up since. While income inequality has always been high, there is a lot more income in the rich countries with modern economies than there used to be. This chart shows the enormous growth in output per person in the United States and other advanced economies. As you can see, in 1820, all countries were poor by modern standards. In 1820, it took 80% of the population to grow food in the United States, but by 2023, only 1% of American workers were directly involved in agriculture. That was due to mechanization and modernization. Much the same increase in productivity occurred a bit later in manufacturing with the industrial revolutions and more recently with automation. This incredible rise in productivity has made the US a very rich country. Here's a closer look at the last 100 years in the United States. Income inequality was quite high during the Roaring Twenties, but after the New Deal and World War II, the middle class expanded and the portion of national income going to the bottom 50% grew. After Reagan's election in 1980, the pre-tax share of national income going to the top 10%, the red line, has gone up by what is about $2.8 trillion per year, while the share going to the bottom 50% has dropped from 20% of national income to 10%, which is about a loss of $2 trillion. Trickle-down economics simply hasn't worked. National income has continued to grow, but average hourly compensation for non-supervisory workers has hardly gone anywhere. Since that group includes many professionals, the outlook for less skilled workers has been even worse. A lot of middle-class people may not realize it, but many Americans struggle economically. In 2019, 53 million people, 44% of Americans' workers, were low wage, with median hourly wages of $10.22 an hour and median annual earnings of less than $18,000. Low-wage workers switch jobs most frequently, but are more likely to churn within a set of low-wage occupations. In other words, mobility is lousy for low-income workers. 37% of Americans can't afford an expense of over $400 without borrowing, and 62% of Americans don't have a college degree. This chart from Pew Research shows that the middle class has shrunk since 1971. Pew Research defines middle class as from two-thirds to twice median income. Both the low end and the upper end of the income spectrum has grown. As the prior chart indicated, U.S. income distribution has become more skewed. The chart on the left shows household incomes by decile in the United States. That's 10% of households, each one of these bars. These are standardized households, and income includes government transfers. The lowest decile has $26,000 in income per statistical household. Note the even steps as we go up in the deciles for our steps 1 through 9. The top 10% income is way out of proportion. The small rectangle here is $10,000. Adding that $10,000 to the lowest decile would make a huge difference for these people. It would go from $26,000 per household to $36,000 per household. But as you can see, it would hardly be noticeable here on the high end of things. Income within the top 10% is itself highly skewed, as this chart on the right shows. The top 1%, this is the top 1%, sticks way, way out. And even without that, and even within that, income is skewed, as you can see here. By the way, the lowest decile pays taxes, even if not income taxes. Wealth is even more skewed than income in the United States. Three men really do own more than the bottom 50%. The top 1% owns about one third of all wealth. The rest of the top 10% owns more than another third. So combined, the top 10% owns more than two-thirds of the wealth. The rest of the top 50%, the 50 to 90%, owns about a third of the wealth. Mostly, this is the middle class, mostly in housing, equity. And the bottom 50% of Americans own virtually nothing, almost no wealth at all. What explains the increased income and wealth inequality of the last 50 years? Many think that trade was a cause. Some think that immigration was a factor. The general term often used for this is globalization. Let's look at these factors. But first, we have to know a bit about how wages are determined in a market economy. Wages in a market economy are determined by the demand for and supply of specific types of labor. For example, after a hurricane, the demand for roofers goes way up, and experienced roofers can charge more. This chart shows the demand for labor, let's say for a factory, as the blue line. So this is a factory owner. As wages go up, he's going to want to employ less labor. And he's going to use things like automation and so on to try to reduce his demand for labor because it becomes cost effective to do so as wages go up. On the other hand, the supply of labor goes up with wages. As the factory owner offers more wages, more people are willing to take those jobs. Where those two lines meet, the factory owner is able to and willing to pay just enough wages so that just enough people will apply for those jobs. And that is where demand and supply for labor meets at, like, say, here at $22 an hour. Now, anything that reduces the demand for labor, let's say automation becomes cheaper, then the factory owner can automate his plant, his factory, and his demand for labor goes down. Now, while the factory owner may not actually determine the wages because he's only one person or one business, across all businesses, the demand for labor will drop. And as the demand for labor drops, so will wages, as you can see here. Also, anything that increases the supply of labor will cause wages to go down because obviously there's more supply for the same demand, so wages will drop to, say, let's say B. Something that might increase the supply of labor, for example, would be immigration. So technology, trade, and immigration can all affect the demand for or supply of labor. We should note that there are supply and demand curves for different types of labor. The one for doctors is different from the ones for plumbers, is different from the one for general labor. We've all heard about the loss of good-paying factory jobs that don't require a college degree. Often trade is blamed for these losses. But as this chart shows, the decline in manufacturing employment as a percent of the total employment has gone down in all advanced economies, including Germany, which is a manufacturing powerhouse. So here's Germany. The red line is the United States. You can see here that the decline has been similar for France, Australia, Canada, and Britain. I've marked the date when NAFTA was signed and the date when China joined the World Trade Organization and liberalized trade. Neither has the slightest discernible effect on this line. The real reason for the decline in manufacturing jobs in advanced economies is automation. It takes fewer workers now to produce larger amounts of goods. The value of manufacturing output has actually increased in the United States, even while manufacturing employment has fallen. Mechanization and automation has reduced the need for employment in agriculture and manufacturing. 80% of us now work in what are called services, and AI may drastically reduce the need for labor in some services going forward. While manufacturing employment has declined, our exports have ballooned in dollars. The US is the second largest exporter in the world behind only China. While we have a large trade deficit compounded by growing government deficits, imports and exports together are 25% the size of the US economy. Anything that hurts the US exports will cause job layoffs. So in this chart, the blue lines are our imports, the red lines are our exports, and as you can see, that's about 25% of total GDP. It's been as high as 30%. And meanwhile, the percent of employees in manufacturing has gone down, even as our net exports have gone way up. What is the economic effect of trade? Trade, when it opened up, changed what we make, and so negatively affects some of the industries and employees, but positively affected other industries and employees. But the main economic effect of trade is to reduce prices. Take, for example, the clothing industry. Imports of clothing from low-wage countries decimated U.S. clothing manufacturing. But in 1960, the average American household spent over 10% per year on clothing. By 2013, the average household was spending 3.5% despite buying far more clothes. That represents a savings of over $2,200 per year per household. The clothing workers found new jobs, but some of them may have lost income. The benefits of lower pricing, that $2,200 over all households, could have paid for those employment losses many times over. Economic theory and real-world studies show that trade always increases overall productivity and hence real income per capita. The problem is the distribution of that income. Studies confirm that neither trade nor immigration has anywhere near the labor effects of technology change, automation, and the increased use of capital. How does immigration affect the economy? The US has the most foreign-born of any country, but not the most as a percent. 21% of Canadians are foreign-born, 20% in Sweden, 19% in Germany, and a little bit less than 15% in the United States. And that includes both authorized and unauthorized migrants. On the negative side, new immigrants can compete for certain types of jobs, which can cause wage competition in those jobs. New immigrants also cost their host communities in terms of social services. On the plus side, the US birth rate is below the replacement rate, meaning that our population would fall without immigrants. Worse, since immigrants are mostly young, the number of working people would fall just at a time when the elderly population is rising. That means fewer workers to support retirees. Immigrant families become just like the rest of the population in the second and subsequent generations and are net economic contributors. Immigrants are not a significant factor in overall country wages. California has twice the number of immigrants per capita, followed by New Jersey, hardly economic basket cases. We've seen that the U.S. output per person and per workers continue to rise, but that the gains in that productivity increase have not been shared with large part of the workforce. Almost all the income gains since 1980 have gone to the top 10%, and even more so to the top 1%. Corporate profits have increased and they flow through to the wealthy through dividends and capital gains. Most of U.S. stock is owned by wealthy individuals, and about 40% is owned by foreigners. Taxes on the wealthy were drastically lowered under Reagan and Republican administrations since that time. The result has been huge federal deficits. That will certainly continue under Trump too, as it did under Trump 1. Union busting has weakened labor bargaining power. Reagan, who was himself a union head early in his career, became, as president, as a union buster. Large company CEO has ballooned to the median 20 million. The ratio of CEO pay to worker pay has risen from about 20 in 1965 to about 300 today. In short, the rich have gotten richer. The picture after taxes is a bit better. We'll look at that more in the upcoming episode on U.S. taxes and spending. So in sum, the U.S. economy produces a net income of around $144,000 per household. Our economy has grown massively in output per person over time. Income inequality has always been high, but after the reforms of the New Deal, both business and the middle class boomed. Since 1980, income inequality has increased again. The pay workers get is determined by supply and demand for labor in a market economy. The main factor influencing changing demand for labor has been technology change, automation, and increased capital. Trade is huge in the US and highly beneficial overall because it reduces prices and increases productivity, but the benefits of trade, like income, are not evenly distributed. Immigration affects the wages of some groups of workers, but without immigrants, our population and workforce would shrink. Income in the US is very highly skewed. The top 10% take home roughly half of national income. Even within that top 10%, income is highly skewed toward the top. Nearly half of US workers are low wages. Wealth inequality is much more skewed even than income inequality. The top 10% owns more than two-thirds of the wealth. The bottom 50% owns virtually no wealth. 3 men own more than the bottom 50%. So coming up, how to fix income inequality in the US without hampering our capitalist market engine. We'll also look at the highly related topic of government spending and taxes in the United States. If you missed it, background for this episode is the one on world income and wealth distribution. All of these talks are based on research presented in the book One World Economics, which you can find online at oneworldeconomics.com. There you can find sources for all the data presented as well as my credentials. I plan to release about one video per week to cover these topics. Please subscribe to get informed of new ones. Thank you. If you found this video useful, here is another you might like. Click the globe above to subscribe and learn about new videos. I plan to release about one a week. See oneworldeconomics.com for in-depth coverage of these topics. Thank you.